You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Happy Tuesday evening, folks. This is Scotty Roberts, and you're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. You can go over to odysy1.com to see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio, and at the same time, check out all the different affiliates and networks where you can pick this show up audibly and on the radio. And also, come on over to my YouTube channel, where you can watch this in a simulcast in video. Now, as I've said before, it might not be all that exciting just to watch my face talking to you. Sometimes we have some cool graphics that we throw up and things like that, but for the most part, you're just watching me. But the best part of the YouTube channel, if you watch it in simulcast with the Odyssey stream, you're going to catch the live chat room with all the other Intrepids who like to come over and comment on this show and all kinds of other things. So come on over and join us. Have a good time over there. And that's over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And so I hope sequestration is biting well with all of you. And I know that there's lots of talk of opening up the economy again and things like that. And I've seen a range of responses on that, from very much for it to very much against it. We see the protests going on, which are basically, I see lots of criticism. Why are they carrying guns and stuff like that? They're basically using this as a demonstration of constitutional rights here in the United States. Now, those of you who live in other countries who listen to this show, many of you from Australia, Great Britain, New Zealand, other places around the globe, this might seem a little odd to you. Now, the carrying of weapons isn't to promote violence against the government. It is nothing of the sort. What they are doing is, many of the people who stand for these rights are pure constitutionalists. And I'm not saying I am for or against. I don't know all the ins and outs of all their particular points of view. But I do know when groups like this wear weapons to their public gatherings, it's merely a demonstration to show that not only do we stand for First Amendment rights, but we stand for Second Amendment rights. We're constitutionalists. We are in a republic of free states, and basically our rights say, yes, you can recommend that we stay home during an outbreak like this, but at the same time, you can allow us to use our common sense to express our constitutional right to say, as they said back in the 18th century, not by your leave. Meaning, we are a free people, and if we want to choose to risk ourselves and go out, we can do that. I don't think it's the smartest move to make. But at the same time, you have all the different stuff that's coming out about what is behind this sequestration. And when you start getting into all of that and then looking at an economy that is right now at a standstill, it's stifled, it's stagnating, and all it took was a month to get us there. Let's reopen some things in a sensible plan, is what they're standing for. And that's all they're saying. So you've seen that. You might be sequestered at home and think, that's ridiculous. What a nutty thing to do. And there are others who think you're staying at home when the threat isn't as grave as we're being told, and that's a nutty thing to do. So you've got all these opposing opinions in this. And so I wouldn't cast too much aspersion on these people who are protesting. I wouldn't be afraid of them. Remember, their Second Amendment rights, and if I need to state that here, just for the record, The Second Amendment doesn't exist to protect your right to go squirrel hunting or target shooting. That is not the sole intent of the founders when they added that amendment as the second only, the very next one after the importance of the First Amendment, which is to free speech and freedom of expression. And that right in the Second Amendment was to say that the people should never be unarmed by their government. And because the right exists to possess and bear arms as a reminder to any government that is in place in this country that if it grows tyrannical, the people have a right to rebel. Even Thomas Jefferson said a little good rebellion every now and then is going to be required probably every 20 years in this republic. And we've seen things like this before. Right now, things are at major loggerheads on a lot of issues. So look at that stuff, take it with a grain of salt. Nobody's out there going to start shooting at the Capitol building or anything, unless they're a nutcase, in which case they aren't doing the same thing as the protesters or the demonstrators. So don't let the news media lead you astray on this. There is a news media that is generally against anybody that is showing any kind of a conservative stance when it comes to the Constitution. And so, and that's a blanket statement, but that's what exists as far as I can see. Excuse me. I don't have a disease. I have a nagging cough I've had for probably 20 years. So don't let that bother you. So, and that's why I'm not wearing a mask while doing radio. So, all of that to say, we started yesterday talking about things that are allowed or disallowed on social media, the way people criticize you, the way people block you, the uncivility or incivility that has raised, especially in the last few years, over people who are so diametrically opposed to each other that social media has become that new outlet to state things that you could never actually open your mouth and say to somebody looking them eye to eye. So social media out there has become uncivil. And I complained a little bit earlier this morning. I was on Facebook and I said something about the fact that Facebook has now come out, and this is nothing new, and they're restricting what people say on Facebook regarding the pandemic that's out there. So Facebook is not there to allow you to express your rights. Now, something I will put this caveat in, and I've said this many times on other issues before, Facebook is a privately owned company, and they have their own rules of engagement. If they want to make a rule that says you can't say a certain thing about the virus, you can't say a certain thing about politicians, you can't say a certain thing about this or that, or show your boobs, full and bare and flashing in the public in a picture that you post, that's their right to do that. It's their company. And you ever wonder why Facebook is free? It's because they don't charge, because once they start charging, they lose the right to really tell you what to do. They own it lock, stock, and barrel. However, I was opining this morning on the fact that Facebook, while being its own company and able to set its own rules, just like YouTube does, there are certain things that you can opine about. You can disagree with them. Now, if you were in the workplace environment, and somebody used this example with me this morning. If you're in a workplace environment and you want to go call the boss nasty names and say you're going to lead a workers' rebellion against him, you may lose your job. Now, that's a very different setting, however, than a place that welcomes you to come in, share your ideas, share your life, share your photos, and many times share your opinions. So if your opinion is not allowed because it doesn't toe the particular party line of Facebook, they will ban you, they will put you in Facebook jail, they'll delete your posts, and so on. They have a right to do that. What I was opining about was whether or not a group like Facebook, an organization like them, who caters to literally, folks, not figuratively, literally billions of people around the globe, why they should not allow somebody to, especially in this nation, where we have an undergirding of constitutional rights and First Amendment rights, why they would disallow anyone from expressing an opinion about the way things are being done, especially when the company itself expresses a differing opinion or holds to a differing opinion. They should be open to allowing people to debate these things and to talk about these things and to talk about what they believe about these things, but they don't. And so my post, and I've got it called up here, and I'm going to read this to you. If you didn't see it this morning, here's what I said. I said, apparently, Facebook is now in the business of shutting down, quote-unquote, harmful misinformation. Yes, if your posts about the current pandemic and the economic fallout do not abide by the standards of this social media network, Facebook, your words will be censored and very possibly banned by this Facebook staff, who have established themselves as the adjudicators of what is right or wrong to say, what underlying rights are available to its users, such as First Amendment to the Constitution here in America. For instance, whether you agree with the premise or not, people protesting the lockdown while calling for the reopening of the economy are considered to be spreading, quote, harmful misinformation, end quote. As Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg recently stated in an interview on ABC's Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos, he said this, Mark Zuckerberg, quote, "We do classify that as harmful misinformation, and we take that down. I think that a lot of stuff that people are saying that is false around a health emergency like this can be classified as harmful information," end quote from Mark Zuckerberg. So is Facebook a place where you're allowed to state your opinions and speak your mind? Is it a place where you can promote ideas consistent with the Constitution, even if they counter recently established pandemic protocols? Apparently, Facebook is the arbiter of what is and is not misinformation, so they will decide for you. So next time you're considering speaking your mind on the world's largest social forum, shut off your computer and go practice your goose-stepping crisis, Crises, at whatever level perceived or practiced, negates your rights, at least according to the bosses at Facebook. So that's what I said this morning, and as you can imagine, I got tons and tons of comments on that. 62 comments as I'm looking at what's on my screen right now. And in those comments, I've got people who are arguing with me about the whole Facebook has a right to do its own thing because it's their company. And I agree with that. And I said several times over in my thread, I said, I'm already well aware of that. And I've talked about that issue for 10 years. Facebook is a privately owned company. They can do whatever the hell they want as far as rules go if they don't break the law. Now, they're not allowed to break the law. Is not the Constitution the supreme law of the land on which all our laws are based? So if there is a law that says you have a right to freedom of expression, can somebody tell you not to express that? Well, in the workplace, a privately owned company usually, or a publicly owned company, a company that you work for, you're not allowed to do certain things. There are rules and regulations by which you must abide. And many companies that are bigger than 5 people usually have a handbook on how the company, what their rules and regulations are. But that, again, is a very different situation. You are working for pay for an employee who pays you to do a job. They're not paying you to opine. With Facebook, you're getting their services for free. You don't have to pay for that. You're in there, but you've got to sign by and abide by their policies, which is just fine. But when it comes to a critical crisis like this pandemic, do we have a right only to state one version of events in accordance with what line the people at Facebook toe? Or if we say something that's different than that, or support something that's different than that, why is that considered misinformation? Look at Facebook and tell me, outside of the pandemic, take the pandemic and move it over here. Everything that goes on Facebook, how much misinformation do you think is spread on Facebook that doesn't get checkered, that doesn't get banned, that doesn't get taken down? You can say, I believe aliens are coming to this planet and they're going to abduct you and butt probe you and do all these other things. Now, if you don't think that's true, that could be misinformation in your book. Should Facebook be taking down those posts as well? Because that could be considered harmful misinformation for people. So, here's the deal. When it comes to a social media, you've got to abide by their rules. I get that. Does that mean you should not be allowed to opine about their rules? Can you say in a post, I disagree with this? Does that get you banned? Should that get you banned? Should it not be spoken about? Now, this morning, in and amongst those 62 comments, I had somebody who's commented on some of my posts in the past. And I can tell what his political leanings are based on other things he said. But he reminded me 3 times in the course of about 8 posts back and forth that this is a public company, and if you want to say what you want, maybe go establish your own social media network. And I basically said to him, well, outright, I said, that's just pedantic and kind of dumb. I said, first of all, I've said the same thing to people. I've said you got to abide by the rules that are here. If you want to complain about them, complain about them, but they do have rules and they have a right to establish their rules. And what I said to this person was, I am opining about that rule. And I said, that should not bother anybody. And I said, it really doesn't require you to remind me 3 times that Facebook has its own set of policies and rules and regulations, because I've said that same thing many times over the years. So this is the kind of thing that starts this discussion that I started yesterday, where people, now individuals, it's not against Facebook's rules to opine about whether women should be overtaking men in the business world or not, but, individuals have a right to ban you or censor you from their threads for commenting on it, which is what happened to me yesterday. I wasn't banned, but I was shut out of a particular thread, not banned by the individual. And this is somebody I've known in real life since they were a kid, 20 plus years ago. So here is the question that I have. Should anything that's deemed as harmful misinformation be something that there is only one adjudicator for, and that is the entity itself? Yeah, they have a right to do that. But when it comes to expressing opinion and people talking about issues, should they then say, well, this person can talk about their issue, but you can't counter them with your issue because we think yours is harmful, or we disagree with your point of view, is what it comes down to. And even Mark Zuckerberg, when he was on camera on Good Morning America with George Stephanopoulos saying what he said, he stumbled around his words a little bit to make sure he was phrasing those properly. Well, this could be, harmful misinformation. Well, according to whom? According to Facebook, and he has a right, because he owns the company, to set whatever rules he wants. But here is the big question now that we're covering over this yesterday and again today, is what are delusions? What are conspiracy theories? And how do we see them on the internet? And how do we express them? What are the things we should and should not say on the internet? Do we have a right to say whatever we want? Well, unless you're going outside the rules and the regulations of that particular entity. And so the question is, should that entity be able to make those rules and regulations if they, in a sense, in spirit, violate the law of the land in which they exist? So there's the big question to consider. So let's move on to the delusion part. Yesterday we started talking about, and I ended with this question. Is it fair to say that the internet and specifically social media can indulge and or exacerbate an inclination toward delusion? And concerning beliefs, what the internet does in a previously unprecedented way is to provide users with nearly inexhaustible sources of quote-unquote evidence and agreement for even the most fringe beliefs that you or I can imagine. Think of just going back 10 years and decades ago, when I was a kid growing up in the late 60s and the early 1970s, all through the 70s, and into the 80s and into the 90s. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have social media. I was 35 to 38 years old, almost 40 years old, really, before the internet became something that was usable and in vogue. I know we were building websites in 1997, and it was very rudimentary stuff back then because it was kind of new. And then there was the big .com hit, and the market dropped, and everything .com went to hell. But then it resurged, obviously. And so the internet is now bigger and better than it ever was. And the rise of social media is something that didn't exist decades ago. If you revealed an unusual belief or a conspiracy theory, as I said yesterday, say you were sitting around at the bar with a bunch of your friends having pints, and you expressed a weird idea, your friends would probably laugh you out of the place and so on. And that's all the further it went, your little circle of friends. Now you can hole up in the privacy of your room today on a computer as an anonymous user and find like-minded individuals on the other side of the globe in moments. Now the problem, of course, is that all too often the evidence, quote-unquote, that you find on the internet consists of misinformation, lies, disinformation, which is different than misinformation. Disinformation is information that's given to deliberately misguide you so you don't go down the path of the true information. And there's trolling that's out there, and that's mistaken as fact, all of those things. Whereas we previously respected information published in books, academic journals, magazines, newspapers, the print media on print and paper. The internet's created a kind of false equivalence whereby all the sources of information are treated on equal footing. And opinions are regarded just as valid as facts, or alternative truths, as we're told. And this has been described as a democratization of knowledge, which has led to the death of expertise. And while many people think that this is a kind of a coup, it's left us vulnerable to believing strongly in things that just aren't so. And that's kind of where we left off yesterday. I recapped a little bit of that. So we were going to have to go out to break in about less than a minute here. So I'm not going to get into the next point until we come back. But consider how you use the internet. Consider what you believe about the things that you see on the internet. We used to say when I was a kid, that's true because I saw it on TV. Today, it's true because I read it on the internet. That's why we so safeguard the fact-finding process. I can find you an article that supports, take any given issue, that gives you 10 different versions and outlooks and points of view on any given issue. Not all of them are going to be true. It's your job as a responsible adult to decipher that information, to dig a little deeper, to find out what's true and what is not. And we're going to come back on that point. Sit tight for a couple of minutes. We'll be right back. All right, gang, we're back from that break. Thanks for sitting tight. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com, where you can hear the audio version of this show. If you would like to see the simulcast in video and join the live chat room that's going on right now as this show is broadcasting, go on over to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Join all the other Intrepheads and have a good time talking it up over there. Now, before I go a little bit further here, I want to do a little personal advertising, a little touting of what I do by throwing this up. And boom, there we go. That's the Intrepid Radio Program official t-shirt that is now available over on my Etsy site. And that's because I didn't want to, and I don't have the dollars to put into buying bulk quantities of these and storing them in my garage. You can order these one by one over at Etsy. And that's etsy.com/shop/son-of-a-patriot. That's my site over there. And this shirt also comes in this steely bluish color, maybe a bluish green, something like that. And it also comes in a hoodie. And that's around here somewhere. Where is it? Oh, that's Son of a Patriot. That's my site over there at... oh, and by the way, while we're here, you can get Daughter of a Patriot in 2 different hairstyles. Look at this. I did the redhead first, and Rainey said, what's this thing you got for redheads? And so I went and I drew this one. That's basically my wife as a patriot with the brunette hair. And trust me, folks, we artists, we go by life. That's pretty much my wife right there. Body, soul, and spirit. So you can get those. You can also, let me see if I can find the hoodie. It's got to be in here somewhere. Let's see. I'm just scrolling through, taking down Daughter, taking down Son of a Patriot. There's the hoodie. You can also get this in a hoodie. And I have them on dark colors because the background won't stand out right. And the white letters and things like that, they just don't look good on the white or the light colored shirts. So there it is. You can get the hoodie, you can get the t-shirts, all by going over to my Etsy page, etsy.com/shop/son-of-a-patriot. So go get one for yourself. I think you'll enjoy wearing it if you enjoy this show. So there we go. And those of you, by the way, who couldn't see those, that's one of the small benefits of watching us over on the YouTube channel in simulcast to the Odyssey Radio audio, so that you can see some of this stuff. And the shirt itself, by the way, for those of you who did not see the image, is the Buck Rogers style old rocket ship that I created in Photoshop, and it's careening through the starry background field behind it with a big starburst in the background, and the name of the show across the bottom, the Intrepid Radio Program. So go ahead and avail yourself. At least go look at them, and if you like what you see, get one for yourself. Boom. End of advertisement. End of shameless self-promotion. Let's get back into what we were talking about this whole internet thing, about misinformation that might be on the internet, delusions, conspiracy theories, and so on. Would you classify a fixation on bizarre political conspiracy theories as a delusion? That would be like the notion that the world is run by a shadowy cabal of extraterrestrial lizard people or reptilians. If not, what would you call it? So there's a question for you, because I've written a book about the reptilians. Now, if you've read my book or heard the readings I've done on this channel on that book, you'll know that I'm a little middle of the road about the whole reptilian thing, because we haven't proven they exist, nor have we proven they don't exist. But usually an argument needs to sustain itself with its evidence and its arguments, not the other way around. If you say, I don't believe in that, I think you're making that all up, or your sources are bad, that's probably a truer analysis of the reptilian issue, because you can't really prove it exists. So on that particular minor point. But let's say I put up something and I'm talking about the reptilians. In psychiatry, the definition of a delusion has really shifted over time. But the core concept has been a fixed false belief. That's the definition of delusion. A fixed false belief. But applying that definition to individual beliefs is often really challenging because many of our beliefs aren't falsifiable. If you believe in God, can you prove the existence of God? Outside your feelings, outside your personal prayer life, outside the euphoria you get from the joy of serving your God, there's no way to prove that. It's all a faith-based, it's a belief-based thing. But it's become kind of a thing where, you can't really go out and psychologically say, well, God just doesn't exist. That's a delusion that you're under. Because we have no way to prove that either way. But if you're going to insist that God exists, personal proof is merely anecdotal, meaning it's your story, it's your version, it's your belief system, and that's all you really have to go on. The Bible itself says, you say you don't believe in God, well, the very rocks and trees will cry out that He exists. Again, that's within a context and a framework of the belief system. So somebody who doesn't believe that might think you are deluded, that you're believing in a fixed false belief. And as a result, psychiatry has taken care to exclude shared beliefs sanctioned by cultures, subcultures like religion or political belief from the definition of delusion. So when people say, let's say you say, I voted for the president, I believe he's the greatest president to ever come down the pike. That's your personal point of view. It might be anecdotal, but is that a delusion? Some people will say, you're deluded, man. That sounds almost Joe Biden-ish. Come on, man! You're deluded. Well, is that a delusion? Not by a psychological or a psychiatric point of view. The things that are shared and sanctioned by cultures and subcultures, that's just your point of view. Somebody might have a different one. So delusions are most obvious when they aren't or cannot be shared by other people, which often means there's a self-referential component, meaning you're only referencing self. For example, it's not a delusion, and we kind of already hit on this, it's not a delusion to hold the shared belief that the Son of God was a human being who was crucified by the Romans, but most of us would agree that believing that you are the second coming of Christ is delusional. If you say, hey folks, believe in me, I'm Jesus coming back. And, if you say that, you're probably delusional. That's not shared by the masses of people who believe in Christianity. Now, of course, there have been examples of charismatic individuals who have made claims like that, who've gained a following in the past, and psychiatry applied the term shared psychotic disorder to that, to explain this phenomenon. But that diagnostic category was eliminated in DSM-5. Whether or not a delusion is shared continues to be an important consideration in diagnosing a delusion. But as was once written in an academic paper that I read, integrating non-psychiatric models of delusion-like beliefs into forensic psychiatric assessment, that was published in the Journal of American Association of Psychiatry and Law, and that was written by Joe Pierre, MD. The internet now makes sharing beliefs possible in a way that the authors of the DSM never could have anticipated. So as for your example, the notion that the world could be run by a shadowy cabal of reptilians probably has mainstream acceptance these days. Take out the reptilians. The world is run by a shadowy cabal, an Illuminati type of organization. That's got some mainstream acceptance out there, and probably tidbits of what you could call evidence that are merely things that aren't really evidence. They're not solid enough to base a true case on, but they're solid enough to say this exists out there. But once we start getting further out there in terms of the details of just what that cabal consists of, some say it's all the Jews, it's those dirty Jews. Others call it the deep state, the Illuminati, extraterrestrial reptilian people. The belief becomes harder and harder to share. So the concept isn't a delusion, but the details, they get more honed and refined and more privately held. Those can be delusional, or at least facts that are very hard to prove. So religious and political beliefs that are shared within subcultures but are extreme and can result in violent behavior at times are problems for society, and they present a real challenge for how people ought to categorize them in psychiatric terms or otherwise. Think of, this is a while back now, but it happened when I was in high school, Jim Jones and his followers. I can't remember what their group was called, but they all committed mass suicide at his behest. That was in Guyana, British Guyana, wasn't it? He was an American dude who was a reverend. He was a pretty staid and true kind of evangelical type of minister. And he went off the deep end. He got his following. His followers followed him, and he convinced them all this is the time to commit suicide, and they all did. It was, you can look him up, Jim Jones, if you're unfamiliar with him. And you can even see pictures of how they found the compound with hundreds of people lying dead, having drunk the Kool-Aid. That's where the term comes. Oh, you're drinking his Kool-Aid. Came from the Jim Jones fiasco, if you will. So beliefs that seem delusional based on their content, but are shared, are often referred to using a kind of waste bucket term that's called delusion-like beliefs. So delusion-like beliefs. Beliefs that are like delusional things. You can discuss delusion-like beliefs and a different way of thinking about them that involves moving away from categorical terms and definitions and understanding the psychological processes that allow such beliefs to develop and to persist in people. So, is there a certain psychological profile that is especially vulnerable to believing and fixating on bizarre conspiracy theories? You think there's a, pardon my cough, do you think that there is a, sometimes by the way when I talk, if I'm not using my voice properly, I wear my throat down, and so I cough a little bit more. When I get excited, I sometimes, you're supposed to speak from the diaphragm like this, and you don't let it go through your throat. And sometimes I'm just talking, so I wear my voice down. So that's my dry cough that comes up. So is there a certain psychological profile that's really vulnerable to believing and fixating on bizarre conspiracy theories? There's been a lot of work in psychology in recent years that's attempted to determine why some people are particularly drawn to conspiracy theories. Much of that work's focused on a search for associations between belief in conspiracy theories and specific psychological traits or cognitive quirks. For example, research has found that people who believe in conspiracy theories tend to have a greater need for cognitive closure. Cognitive closure. That's the desire to have an explanation when explanations are lacking. You might say, believe whatever it is. Take the conspiratorial belief that you want to believe in, or the weird belief that you believe in. Take Bigfoot. There is, I happen to think Bigfoot exists, but that's a cognitive quirk of mine. But people with this cognitive closure are usually people who have a psychological tendency to need that desire to have an explanation when explanations are lacking. Bigfoot is a leftover from primordial times. He is a creature that there are so few of, and he likes his privacy, he has some sentience, and is able to avoid you. He is a mystical being that can appear from other dimensions. He's magical being. He's UFO oriented, alien oriented. And there's all of those particular explanations of Bigfoot. But are those cognitive quirks? Are they cognitive explanations that are given for cognitive closure? I believe this theory, and here is my explanation for that. I got to have an explanation for the unexplained. That's cognitive closure. And these people who have this are generally likely to have a cognitive bias called hypersensitive agency detection. Okay? Hypersensitive agency detection. Or teleologic thinking, whereby events are over-attributed to hidden forces, purposes, motives, things that are hidden, they're out of sight. We don't understand the hidden hand when it comes to, the vast conspiracy that's running our world behind the scenes, which probably exists to a certain extent, but I think can probably be easily explained by one word: money. Two words: money and power. The control of money and power. If you think that doesn't exist out there, even above and beyond the leaders of our country and our governments, you got to dig a little deeper and find that. But is that teleologic thinking? Is that hypersensitive agency detection? Are we attributing it to hidden forces? Yeah, to a certain extent. Some research has also found that conspiracy beliefs are associated with lower levels of education. I'm smart, SMRT, smart, because I've got a handle on the aliens that are really running this world from behind the scenes. And if you don't watch out, your reptilian captors are going to make sure you disappear. You're going to be eaten and pooped out by a lizard man. Watch yourself. So, the uneducated. And sorry I lapse into Southern or Appalachian accents or dialogue. No offense to my Appalachian hyper-educated friends that are out there. So, I had a girl I dated in high school. Her dad was one of the seminary professors, really high up at the seminary, knew his stuff, but he was from West Virginia, and he kind of talked like that, so he kind of proved the antithesis to my theory that everybody kind of dumb and stupid and uneducated talks with an accent like that. So, I don't mean any offense to anybody. Boom. All right. So, studies have revealed that half of the U.S. population believes in at least one political or medical conspiracy theory. So belief in conspiracy theories is far more normal than any of us might even think it is. Are there certain traumas or triggers that can spark this kind of a fixation in people? And one aspect of conspiracy theories has been relatively neglected in research is the issue of epistemic mistrust. Epistemic mistrust, or the lack of faith in knowledge and in institutions like science or governments that have traditionally supplied that knowledge. Here, I'm going to do it again. You can't trust that information because it comes from your government. What's science? No, science just kind of tells you things. Uses math and stuff like that. I'm talking about real life. Real life where science doesn't apply and governments don't apply. God damn it. So, that's the kind of thinking. And again, pardon me, my southern or southeastern friends. I'm just using it for comic effect. So, this, in my view, is the starting point for many truthers out there who end up down the rabbit hole and find an answer in a conspiracy theory. Now, that doesn't mean the conspiracy theory doesn't hold any water or isn't true. Sometimes fact is stranger than fiction. There might be things that are presented to us that are wildly conspiracy. Not everything has to make sense like it's mathematical. Not everything has to do that. There are probably things out there that exist in ways that seem totally illogical to science, that seem totally illogical in a governmental position, but they exist. So, the loss of faith in those institutions can come from a variety of triggers. This includes real-life instances of bias, corruption, fraud, failure, and even examples of conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. For example, here we go. The anti-vaccine movement, anti-vaxxers. It was born out of fraudulent research conducted by a physician that was published in a respected medical journal. Although the study has since been retracted and the physician was stripped of his medical license, faith in the institution of medical research has suffered. So ironically, the physician who published the fraudulent research continues to have a following, while anti-vaxxers often believe that the medical establishment is in bed with the pharmaceutical companies that make vaccines and therefore can't be trusted. And there's some stuff about that. We could cover that as a whole show or two about the anti-vaxxers and the plague of science denial. Now, take for instance this particular pandemic we're in. They're working very hard to swiftly create a vaccination for this. But along with that comes the conspiracy theories, which state that the people who are doing this are putting nanotechnology into the vaccine. So if they vaccinate you with that, they have a way to trace you, and they say it's for medical purposes, to trace you, to track your wellness and your condition and so on. But that can also be used for other things. Look at the idea of, if this is so, if this conspiracy theory were true, and you wouldn't be able to go out and go into the open marketplace and buy things. You'd have to be scanned for this nanotechnology. That, when it first came out, sounded an awful lot to me like the stuff we were taught in eschatology, in Bible school, when I was a kid in the youth group. The prophecy of the end times. The Bible says in these prophecies that everybody under the Antichrist, when he comes to rule in the end times, the whole world, that everybody's going to be given a mark of the beast in the forehead or the wrist, and that they wouldn't be able to buy or sell without the mark of the beast. Now, in archaic terms, extrapolating that into the modern, could that possibly be implants? Could it be nanotechnology? Maybe, but there is absolutely no evidence that this is taking place. There is conspiracy theories based on little tidbits of fact and evidence that are out there, but not able to be substantiated for sure. Unless you're a deep conspiratist down the rabbit hole. So, other national traumas, like the assassination of JFK, or the death of Princess Diana. I remember when JFK was killed, I just turned 3 on the day after he was assassinated. I was 3 years old, so I didn't know much about it, but I grew up with that knowledge. My mom saved all the newspapers from that. I remember I had those into my middle school years. I remember seeing those things. But the death of Princess Diana happened in the 90s. I witnessed her marriage to Prince Charles on public television, broadcast television. And then I also witnessed the incident of her death in public television. So that's in more recent memory as an adult. I was in my 30s. And so the death of Princess Diana, those things, like JFK, have resulted in a lot of people trying to achieve cognitive closure through searches for alternative explanations, even to this day. And in a previous article that I read, Never Forget the Lasting Psychological Impact of 9/11, it was speculated how 9/11 was a collective trauma that might have paved the path to conspiracy theories through a loss of faith in government. So, if there's a note here that I want to read to you. the historically low ratings of our current presidential candidates is any reflection of the state of the union, it would appear that we live in a time of maximal pessimism about government. Perhaps that was an inevitable outcome for a country that lived through the deadliest attack on homeland soil in the history of our existence. If our leaders were unable to keep us safe then, is it any wonder that some took their skepticism to the point of conspiracy theory, coming up with 9/11 denialism and the so-called truther movement? Is it any wonder that some level of skepticism has taken root in the mainstream, reflected in the backing of political outsiders like Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump, and both of whom people are hoping would take our country in a different direction? I think Trump has proven himself, albeit with a lot of detractors, who once again hail to their conspiracy theories about him. So the conspiracy theory thing swings both ways. So for individuals with certain cognitive traits, such events might very well be pivotal. I'm talking too fast or something. Too much caffeine this morning. I love caffeine. I love my coffee, and I love drinking my coffee because it gives me caffeine and makes me talk faster. It's like caffeine, Godzilla caffeine. I love it. Pivotal-nitis that started them on a path toward believing in conspiracy theories. That might have started in some weird mistrusts of religion, of government, of everything else. And now we haven't again tapped the tip of the iceberg of this topic. We're going to continue this tomorrow. We're going to talk about what treatments would look like for a person with demonstrable, life-affecting fixation on conspiracy theories. Things like that. We're going to go into a lot more detail because we got a lot of information here to share. So I hope this was fun, helpful, and enjoyable. We'll see you again tomorrow night after this 23-hour break. Be right back here. Have a good night.